looked at was I was looking for tire impressions on the driveway. I only saw one set from the moment that drone went up.
The case of Nancy Guthrie may be closer to a final resolution than most people realize, and not because of the reported DNA bombshell. The physical evidence receiving zero public attention is the tire impression. Someone navigated to Nancy's driveway the night she vanished. A predator drove away with her. Tires leave a lasting mark, and the FBI has a database covering virtually every tire ever manufactured. If investigators pulled a clean print from that circular path, a print different from Tommaso Chione's Honda, they had a suspect profile instantly. Within hours, a specific vehicle profile could be identified, narrowing a sea of cars down to a single predatory vessel for police. The primary question is whether they ever gave that database anything to work with. Since February 1st, 2026, the day Nancy disappeared. Nancy Guthrie was declared missing from her Catalina Foothills estate in Tucson, Arizona, and one single word has driven this entire forensic investigation: DNA. The reason for this fixated focus is not irrational. Within days of Nancy's disappearance, Sheriff Nanos confirmed genetic material was recovered. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed that foreign genetic material had been successfully recovered from the interior of her high-end desert home. This was material that did not belong to Nancy, to her family, or to anyone with a documented legal reason to have been in that house. Investigators believed it belonged to the person who took her. The blood on the front steps, the porch, and driveway was confirmed. While the driveway was marked by her blood, the foreign DNA found inside became the primary thread the entire investigation has been pulling. Identify that sequence, and you likely identify the person responsible for one of America's most high-profile and truly disturbing disappearances. Yet, more than 2 months in, that thread has not led anywhere, not to a name, an arrest, or a face for the public. The face behind the mask, captured on the doorbell camera, remains a total void. The reason why matters immensely to the logical argument being made. Every day the DNA avenue stalls is another day this investigation needs something else. On the dark night of February 1st, something else. Something else was sitting on that driveway. Something not requiring a laboratory breakthrough or a massive sequence search across the federal system. Something not requiring a court order for a genealogy platform. Something not depending on whether any suspect happens to be in a database. This evidence does not rely on whether a suspect exists in a database. It merely required a trained examiner and the right equipment. A trained examiner, the right equipment, and an undisturbed surface. That is the tire impression, a signature left in the desert dirt. The FBI has had a database ready to work with it for decades. Most people following this case have a general, vague sense. They realize tire tracks can be useful without fully understanding how precise and how immediately actionable that forensic science actually is for police. Before we examine what happened or may not have happened at Nancy's driveway, we must understand what forensic tire analysis is actually capable of. The capability here is massive, and it is vital to understand exactly what was on the table at that Tucson crime scene. The FBI Criminal Justice Information Services Division, CJIS, maintains what is formally known as the Footwear and Tire Tread Files Federal Database. The Criminal Justice Information Services Division, or CJIS, manages the Footwear and Tire Tread Files database. Every major manufacturer submits their tread design specifications to this federal system. They submit proprietary tread specifications to this system. They catalog groove configurations, sight patterns, and the specific block arrangements. These arrangements and precise dimensional measurements define each factory model. When a forensic examiner recovers a crime scene impression, an examiner recovers an impression and submits it for comparison, allowing examiners to search those specific federal tread specifications. These specifications identify with high confidence the brand, model, and size of the tire that made the physical impression. From there, secondary manufacturer databases document which specific tire sizes and specifications are factory fitted to various vehicle models. This fitted data links to specific vehicles. The inference moves from a mark pressed into the driveway to a vehicle. It moves from the surface to a tire type and a vehicle class, creating a direction that did not exist before. This impression was collected. This is no emerging technique being tested for the first time. Courts across the nation, across the United States, regularly accept tire impression photographs and physical casts as primary evidence in major criminal trials. These proceedings occur when impressions match a suspect vehicle. The Scientific Working Group on Shoeprint and Tire Tread Evidence SWGTREAD, publishes the formal minimum qualification standards for the professional specialists. These examiners undergo hundreds of hours of training in tire manufacturing processes, impression photography, and evidence collection protocols. They study manufacturing processes, photography, and evidence protocol. This is a clinical, established forensic science with a documented record. This established science has a documented track record and evidentiary value within the American legal system and courtroom trials. What separates it from DNA makes it specifically relevant to the challenges of this Nancy Guthrie kidnapping case. The tire impression database does not require a suspect to already exist in any registry or criminal database anywhere. It does not require prior arrest records or any genetic material from known family relatives in the federal system. Forensic tire analysis requires zero voluntary database enrollment to identify the machine that breached a victim's property. Once a technician recovers a clean impression, the database identifies the exact vehicle class that made it. The vehicle becomes a tangible lead, ending the hunt for a phantom suspect in an anonymous car. Investigators are hunting a specific machine that crossed a specific driveway during those silent final night hours. The mechanical collection of a usable impression varies based on the unique physical properties of the surface. In prime forensic conditions, heavy clay, packed mud, or deep snow, the tire creates a perfect physical mold. Rubber weight compresses the earth, forcing the substrate into the exact geometry of the tire's tread pattern. Grooves, sipes, and intricate channels are captured within the soil with clinical, microscopic levels of definition. Examiners pour specialized dental stone into that void, creating a heavy, permanent three-dimensional replica of the tire. This cast mirrors every class characteristic and individual flaw with the precision required for laboratory comparison. The physical cast is cross-referenced against master database specifications to generate a comprehensive, actionable vehicle profile. On harder, non-porous surfaces, the strategy pivots entirely to the use of high-resolution, precision documentation photography. On these difficult substrates, one specific technique determines if evidence exists or if the lead vanishes. Oblique lighting is the critical factor, the razor's edge between uncovering a clue and finding absolutely nothing. A light source is positioned at an extreme low angle, nearly parallel to the Earth's flat surface. These elongated shadows expose subtle variations completely invisible to the naked human eye under standard light. Tread compressions that vanish under overhead lighting become readable once an oblique source sweeps across the ground. Examiners have successfully pulled tire data from concrete, hardwood, and surfaces that appeared to hold zero value. The technique works by weaponizing the physics of shadow to reveal depth that direct light flattens out. Heavy scale rulers are placed alongside the impression before photography begins to ensure every dimension is documentable. Without that scale, measurement comparisons are legally unreliable. In forensics, the ruler is a mandatory requirement. It is the professional standard for situations where a vehicle has deposited rubber particles onto a driveway. This residue, transferred from the spinning tire, contains the physical signature of the perpetrator's high-speed exit. Electrostatic dust lifters use high-voltage charges to pull patterns onto film with surgical, high-fidelity accuracy. Gelatin lifters perform similar extractions on textured substrates, capturing material at a resolution that supports database matches. Every tool, the lighting kit, the scale rulers, the electrostatic film, is mandatory equipment for any evidence team. For the specialists walking onto Nancy Guthrie's property, there is one final layer of analysis to understand. As a tire accumulates miles, it develops a pathological history unique to that individual tire's specific usage. Misalignment causes uneven wear. Road debris leaves jagged cuts and permanent nicks in the black rubber. These unique characteristics transfer to the ground, allowing an examiner to identify one specific, individual tire. They can assert that one tire and only that tire produced the impression found at the crime scene. The more a tire is driven, the more incriminating its unique, damaged signature becomes for the suspect. This science worked in favor of the detectives and against whoever breached Nancy's driveway that night. The science was ready, the database was primed. Only the surface of the driveway remained a mystery. That surface was the threshold where this investigation would either find its best opportunity or fail. On day 67 of the hunt, Brian Enton sat with Maureen O'Connell, a veteran FBI agent. She spent her career on the Bureau's evidence response team, reserved for high-stakes forensics. The ERT is deployed when a crime scene requires the highest level of processing and absolute precision. These are not general field agents. They are specialists whose only job is identifying and recovering evidence. They arrive, document every microscopic category of evidence with clinical accuracy, and collect the cold truth. Maureen O'Connell did this work for her entire career. She knows exactly what a scene should yield. When she speaks about the Guthrie scene, she is looking for the failures that standard investigators miss. The evidence was there, etched into the ground, waiting for someone with the right tools to find it. If the team failed to use oblique lighting, the killer's path remained a ghost in the dark. O'Connell sat across from Enton, ready to break down exactly what the scene may or may not have held. Personal theories were irrelevant. She adhered strictly to the cold, mechanical standards her unit was commissioned to protect and enforce. During her debrief with O'Connell, she admitted the very first thing she scrutinized when aerial drone footage of Nancy's home became public was the driveway. Her eyes were locked onto that stone path, hunting for the faint, telltale compression where heavy rubber tires met the desert grit. From the moment that lens reached altitude, only one solitary set of tracks appeared, ignoring the fresh bloodstains near the front entrance. She looked past the security cameras and the rear doors found swinging wide by family members on the morning of February 1st. Her focus remained on the driveway, the only surface capable of proving a vehicle arrived to take Nancy Guthrie away forever. Consider the window between January 31st and February 1st, and the specific events we know occurred on that stone path with certainty. At approximately 9:48 p.m., the headlights of a Honda CR-V cut through the dark as Tommaso Sion brought Nancy home. He sat in the silence of the driveway, waiting until she was safely inside her house, a detail later verified by Sheriff Nanos. Neighbors' Ring cameras caught the glow of his taillights as he pulled away at 9:50 p.m., leaving the property to the night. As the garage door groaned shut, Nancy was officially alone, marking the final confirmed moment of her life before the silence took hold. Sion's car was impounded and scrubbed for evidence, eventually being returned after both he and Nancy Guthrie passed their polygraph examinations. His presence on that granite that night is a verified fact, a data point that the investigation has fully accounted for and cleared. Those tracks represent the known quantity, a familiar tread pattern left by a vehicle that the state has already mapped and dismissed. O'Connell was hunting for the phantom, the unknown quantity of a second vehicle that should not have been on that property that night. She searched for a break in the dust or a tread line cutting in a direction that contradicted the Honda's documented path. Any proof that another predator had crossed that stone in the hours between Sion's departure and the arrival of the police. What she identified was a single set of tracks with a documented reason to exist, which was all the footage could provide. That was the ceiling of what the bird's-eye view could offer, a glimpse of the known, but never the full truth. Before drawing a conclusion from that silence, one must understand the stark difference between a media drone and a forensic tool. A news helicopter or a hobbyist drone captured for a nightly broadcast is not a precision tool for a homicide investigation. The angle is strictly overhead, flattening the scene under whatever ambient light is available, rather than controlled, low-angle forensic illumination. There are no scales in these frames, and there is no altitude calibration tied to any measurable distance on the ground. Those aerial shots offer the audience a real estate overview of the property, not a microscopic look at a potential crime scene. They are incapable of extracting forensic data from a surface as stubborn and granular as the sun-baked Arizona desert. A heavy vehicle idling on that driveway for just moments would leave a compression mark invisible from that high altitude and angle. That compression exists, but the camera is too far away to catch the subtle, dark shift in the texture of the granite. Yet, that same phantom mark would scream under the horizontal glare of an examiner's oblique light source held at the ground. O'Connell understands this better than any amateur watching from a couch, because she is the one who carries the light into the dark. She wasn't looking at that footage to declare the driveway empty. She was looking to see what the public could already confirm. Her process was clinical, identifying the knowns in the grainy video before isolating the void where the ground-level truth likely hid. She was pointing to the one question that required boots on the ground and a specialized forensic eye to properly answer. Did the first units on scene document that surface under controlled lighting before the boots of first responders crushed the evidence? O'Connell noted a specific detail about the terrain itself, the exact composition of the earth at the Nancy Guthrie property. Nancy Guthrie's driveway consists entirely of a material known as decomposed granite, which shapes the entire forensic argument. Because it is made of decomposed granite, it is notoriously difficult to pull a clear, identifiable tire impression from the surface. However, if you have a master photographer and specialized low-angle lighting, you can force the ground to reveal secrets. To grasp why this matters, you have to look at how this specific geological debris reacts when a vehicle rolls over it. This isn't soft sand or soil, it is the skeletal remains of ancient granite broken into sharp, sand-sized mineral shards. It gives way under a massive load, compressing into a firm, gritty floor that feels solid under the weight of tires. Across the American Southwest, this is the standard for high-end residential landscaping, practical, rugged, and perfectly suited for the desert. It handles the heat and the wind with ease, blending into the brutal, dry landscape of the Arizona foothills. In the world of impression evidence, it is classified as a nightmare, a surface that resists giving up any useful data. The problem is the jagged particles. They compress, but they lack the cohesion to hold the fine edges of a tread. Mud and clay are perfect mirrors, but decomposed granite is a fractured surface that blurs the identity of the killer. Decomposed granite is inherently treacherous. Its loose top layer ensures that even a slight gust of wind or a single boot print starts obliterating physical evidence within mere seconds. This unstable grit formed the exact stage where a predator positioned their heavy vehicle near Nancy Guthrie's threshold to haul her frail body inside. Recovering traces from this unforgiving earth requires advanced oblique lighting photography, a clinical method utilized only by a highly specialized, elite evidence response unit. When technicians sweep a high-intensity light source across that coarse mineral at a sharp, calculated angle in total darkness, they expose tire tread compressions. These minute indentations remain completely masked to the naked eye under normal light. The singular haunting variable in this forensic equation is whether these tools were deployed to that driveway before the heavy boots of first responders crushed whatever secrets the dirt held. Investigator O'Connell isolated the circular drive as the primary staging point for the predator's vehicle. This loop is where tire impressions would settle. It offered the most direct path for an efficient extraction. With the rear gates locked, the front door became the path of least resistance for a kidnapper. Perhaps a barking dog forced a sudden change in plans, pushing the perpetrator toward the open circular driveway. This layout allows a car to glide in, idle, and vanish without the noise of a three-point turn. Pull up, kill the engine, grab the target, go. Every second of contact forced rubber into jagged stone. As they hauled an 84-year-old woman unable to walk, the car's weight pressed a signature into the earth. The ground memorized that weight. But whether that memory survived until qualified experts arrived is the focal point. Everything depends on whether those first responders possessed the specialized training to see what was hidden in plain sight. Every indentation in that grit represented a mechanical truth about the suspect's movements. But truth is fragile, and in this jurisdiction, it was left unprotected in the open desert air. Fears regarding the contamination of that driveway on the morning of February 1st aren't just internet rumors. Verified reports and public testimony from high-ranking officials confirm a catastrophic mismanagement of the physical evidence. Public records paint a devastating portrait of how Nancy Guthrie's residence was handled in those first vital hours. Pima County Sheriff's deputies arrived, performed a cursory walkthrough, and then made a fatal tactical error. They released the scene within 24 hours, only to reseal it, release it, and reseal it again in a loop. This frantic cycle of opening and closing the perimeter occurred during the most vital window for forensic preservation. Investigative journalists and high-level insiders at NewsNation confirmed this chaotic lack of scene integrity. Yet the haphazard perimeter control was only the surface. The initial responding team itself was fundamentally flawed. Peers within the law enforcement community have leveled staggering accusations of incompetence against the first officers on site. A source embedded in the investigation revealed that the personnel on scene in those first hours were not seasoned homicide detectives. Instead, the supervisor allegedly running the show had zero prior experience leading a homicide investigation. This was an amateur-led operation during a professional-grade crisis. This isn't just noise from the web. These facts are sourced directly from the investigative community, detailing a massive institutional collapse when every second counted. It depicts a total breakdown of protocol at the precise moment that required the highest level of expertise. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer identified 4 catastrophic blunders that doomed the search for Nancy. Her assessment was blunt. She stated the scene was abandoned with reckless haste before it was properly processed. Then came the decision to terminate search parties on only the second day, a move she labeled a failure. An unprepared supervisor struggled with the scene's complexity while the clock ticked toward a dead end. The FBI, the only agency with the elite equipment to process such a delicate scene, never got the call. In any abduction, Kidnapper insists the Bureau must be the priority, not an afterthought days later. "This is a kidnapping," she stated. "Your very first phone call has to be to the FBI. Period. There is no room for debate or procedural boxes to check. You call the experts immediately, or you lose." By the time local police reached out, a team of ill-equipped amateurs had already trampled the evidence. Once a scene is compromised, it is gone forever. You cannot reclaim the stolen potential of those first 48 hours. The first 2 days are the heartbeat of an investigation. Kidnapper now openly doubts if justice is even possible. It isn't a lack of current effort, but the permanent damage done during those first 48 hours that haunts in this case. The window for forensic perfection closed, while the lead supervisor was still learning the basics of a homicide scene. Every piece of evidence that wasn't collected in those initial moments is a ghost that will never be caught. The failure wasn't just a mistake in judgment. It was a systemic refusal to recognize the gravity of the situation as it unfolded. Nancy Guthrie was taken, and while the kidnapper was making their getaway, the people responsible for finding her were walking away. By the time the FBI arrived, the trail was cold, the driveway was trampled, and the physical reality of the crime had been erased. The clock ran out before the investigation even truly began. This isn't just about a missing person anymore. It is about a system that failed a vulnerable woman when she needed it to be at its absolute sharpest. Consider the fallout. Clarence Dupnick served as the Pima County Sheriff, not some amateur commentator or a retired deputy chasing internet fame. He occupied the exact office Chris Nanos holds today, serving as his immediate predecessor. After reviewing the official records of the Guthrie crime scene management, he chose one specific word: corrupted. Not compromised, not potentially tainted, corrupted. Dupnick highlighted specific surveillance footage showing a civilian vehicle with no business on that property driving directly onto Nancy Guthrie's front lawn, while the area was a designated active scene. A pizza delivery car, noted in several police reports, was filmed cutting across the lawn during the height of the investigation. This was no police cruiser. No one inside had a badge or a warrant. It was a private citizen violating a forensic perimeter that should have been locked down. Every inch of that entrance was a potential vault for forensic data. Dupnick observed that this uncontrolled contact is precisely what obliterates impression evidence before it can be logged. Now, weigh that against Maureen O'Connell's analysis of the circular driveway. She saw that path as the primary staging area for the killer's vehicle. She questioned if proper tire impressions were cast before the surface was trampled. The documentation reveals a disturbing pattern of mismanagement during those critical first 48 hours. A squad with zero homicide experience, a commanding officer who had never led a capital murder probe, a scene that was opened and resealed multiple times. A civilian car crossing the grass suggests a perimeter that existed only in theory. It lacked the rigid control that fragile evidence in loose soil demands. Not even close. There is a fundamental truth about crime scene containment that most observers never realize. When a forensic boundary is set at a location like the Guthrie home, it is not a suggestion. It is a barrier. Every square foot inside that tape is treated as a high-value evidence surface until it has been meticulously mapped and cleared. You do not drop a perimeter until the work ends. Breaking the seal too early surrenders control. You invite civilian footprints and news crews idling on the gravel. You risk emergency crews crossing zones that have not been photographed. Family members driven by trauma might step onto those surfaces, unintentionally overwriting the killer's own physical signature. A professional operation at Nancy's home, with its granular driveway and signs of forced entry, would have prioritized the driveway as a primary zone of interest from the very first second of arrival. Aerial views first, then specialized oblique lighting photography of the entire surface before anyone took a step. Then and only then, you cast the impressions. That rigid sequence is the professional standard. It is what the Academy demands. It is the core protocol the FBI's evidence response team enforces. Yet, whether that sequence was respected in the dark hours of February first remains a haunting unknown. The first team on site lacked homicide tenure, and their supervisor had no experience managing a murder. O'Connell's unit, the FBI experts, arrived with electrostatic lifters, precision scale gear, and specialized lighting kits. These are examiners trained to pull secrets from decomposed granite, but the FBI did not get the call. By the time the specialists arrived, the scene had been processed by amateurs and released at least once. It had already been subjected to the exact civilian contact that a sealed perimeter is designed to prevent. In forensic terms, the window for collecting clean tire or boot impressions was already slamming shut. That window opened when the suspect fled, but it began to close when the first untrained boot landed. Evidence in decomposed granite is fleeting. Wind erodes them, walking scatters them, other tires erase them forever. The science required to read those marks fails once the surface has been overwritten by modern noise. O'Connell stopped short of saying the evidence was destroyed. She is too clinical for such a broad claim. In the forensic language of time, the window for pristine collection on that circular path was slamming shut. It opened when the killer left, but began closing the second boots hit the dirt. Experts with specialized equipment found themselves fighting a clock that started hours before they arrived. Forensic impressions on decomposed granite are temporary. Wind erodes them. Walking scatters them. Other tires erase them forever. The methodology to read those prints fails on any surface already overwritten by chaos. O'Connell never claimed the proof was entirely destroyed. She is far too disciplined to make a claim she cannot verify. The clock was ticking against the desert sun. There was an urgent need to document every inch of that driveway's grit before the scene was released and the evidence vanished. Once the yellow tape comes down, forensic opportunity evaporates. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has the tools, but they cannot analyze a shadow that was never photographed. This manhunt has now ground on for more than 60 days. Over 13,000 individual tips have been processed, cataloged, and mostly discarded by the task force. The biological stains found on the front threshold, the porch, and that granular driveway have been scientifically confirmed as Nancy's deoxyribonucleic acid. A pair of discarded gloves, located 2 miles from the residence, was processed for genetic material and entered into the national database, but it returned a hollow silence. Grainy security frames show a masked predator, approximately 5 feet 9 inches tall, carrying a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker backpack through the desert heat. That surveillance footage has been pushed to the public, a digital plea for a name to match the faceless shadow moving through the Tucson night. A forensic artist rendering now circulates while a massive multi-agency dragnet sweeps through the rugged and unforgiving terrain of the Catalina foothills. Authorities have reached out to Mexican federal police, fully aware that the international border sits barely 1 hour to the south of the Guthrie property. Federal agents conducted aggressive raids across the surrounding neighborhood in the frantic weeks immediately following her disappearance, looking for any sign of a struggle. Yet, in the center of this storm of police activity, one critical question remains unspoken. Was the driveway at Nancy Guthrie's home actually secured for analysis? Was the tire impression evidence properly documented in those high-stakes hours when the patterns were still fresh and readable in the Arizona dust? This technical silence is deafening. It does not mean the evidence is trivial. It means the system may have blinked when the stakes were highest. In a case fueled by raw emotion and massive scale, it is terrifyingly easy for cold forensic details to be suffocated by the sheer weight of the chaos. The ransom demands grabbed the headlines. The masked figure on camera became the face of the nightmare. Every digital breadcrumb was dissected by the public. Even the genetic mystery took center stage. But that driveway, the specific coarse terrain where a vehicle staged its arrival, remained a neglected forensic afterthought. It was the staging ground where a predator prepared to transport a woman physically incapable of walking herself, yet the ground itself was largely ignored by the narrative. Maureen O'Connell, however, focused on the dirt. She immediately scrutinized the physical reality of that driveway and the stories told by the weight of tires. Her primary concern was what that surface could reveal about the predator's movements. On day 67, she spoke out about the mismanagement of the scene. In a conversation with Brian Enton, she dissected the timeline of access and the high-stakes gap between local response and elite federal resources. The window for perfect evidence collection is microscopic. Whether the initial responders preserve that window is the central tension of this entire forensic argument. If the footwear and tire tread files at the Criminal Justice Information Services Division were provided with a high-resolution scaled sample, the search changes. A properly documented oblique-lit cast from that circular driveway would have identified a vehicle that had zero legitimate reason to be on that private property. That single piece of data would have narrowed the search to a specific make, model, and year with clinical mathematical precision. That is more than a lead, it is a compass. In an investigation wandering for 60 days without a true north, a vehicle profile is everything. Identifying the heavy machinery that carried Nancy away would have completely re-engineered the search parameters and the psychological profile of the suspect. We must consider the tactical reality of federal work. Investigators in active kidnappings rarely broadcast the specific cards they are holding during a manhunt. To maintain operational security, the Bureau might be sitting on clean, high-contrast impressions of those tire tracks and keeping them under total lock and key. They could have already matched the tread to a specific manufacturer and be tracing the vehicle's movements right now without the public knowing a thing. If that is the case, they would remain silent. But a lack of public noise is not proof that the collection was performed correctly. Silence from the authorities cannot simply be used to hide the documented confusion and tactical errors of those first critical hours at the house. Carmona stated clearly that the scene was compromised. Kidnapper warned that the first 48 hours were essentially scorched earth for investigators. O'Connell's professional assessment was even more grim. The forensic window likely slammed shut before the right eyes even arrived on the scene. If this is a crime scene, the clock has run out. Shoe prints are pulverized, tire impressions are almost certainly lost to the wind by now. 3 investigators, 3 distinct professional frameworks, all converging on one fatal flaw: a surface that held evidence and a response that arrived too late. There is a chance the tire question was answered in a secret lab, and the public is simply waiting for a truth that has already been found. That would be the ideal scenario, a sign of a competent, quiet machine working for justice. It remains a very real possibility in this case. Or, the more unsettling reality, the window closed before the specialists arrived with their kits, and the most actionable non-DNA lead is gone. Both possibilities exist in the current void. One leads to a conviction, the other leads to a cold case file that never stops bleeding. One outcome honors Nancy. The other is a systemic failure that will follow this case into history, a permanent stain on the record of those responsible. The clock is still ticking. FBI agents and Pima County investigators are still out there, grinding through every remaining lead they have in the desert. Their persistence is undeniable, and their commitment to the hunt deserves respect as they attempt to salvage justice from the surrounding chaos. But the history of how the first hours were managed is already written. The critiques from Kidnapper, Carmona, and O'Connell are now part of the record. Their expert warnings form a permanent, troubling account of this investigation's fragile start. The forensic record is a witness that never forgets. The questions regarding those tire impressions remain a jagged, unresolved piece of a puzzle that may never truly be whole. The pursuit of justice cannot be fueled by good intentions. The only answers that matter are etched into that cold, decomposed granite surface. In the blackest hours of February 1st, 67 days later, Maureen O'Connell scrutinizes aerial surveillance of the driveway with the clinical eyes of a federal agent. She possesses the veteran instincts of a career spent on the FBI evidence response team, allowing her to point the investigation toward one specific overlooked variable. There is no room for intuition or guesswork here. She dissects the scene with the rigid mechanical discipline that years of federal training burned into her. She immediately identifies the lethal discrepancy between what modern forensic science is capable of and what the initial management of the scene likely compromised. The FBI footwear and tire tread database is a silent predator, waiting for a single impression to cross-reference against every vehicle profile in the country. An oblique lighting technique designed to read impressions on decomposed granite exists and remains a standard protocol documented throughout the world of forensic literature. The sequence from a physical impression to a tire type, then to a specific vehicle profile, is a proven high-stakes investigative path that leads to a door. This process does not require a massive software breakthrough or a complex genealogy database waiver. It requires one singular physical reality, the print itself. If investigators captured that print with the professional equipment and specialized training the moment demanded, that evidence is currently working in the shadows of this case. It would mean that somewhere in a secure file, a piece of data is performing labor the public has not been permitted to witness yet. This implies the driveway surrendered its secrets the very second a qualified expert stood over the soil with a high-intensity oblique light in their hand. However, if the window of opportunity slammed shut before the FBI team cleared the gate, then the most vital forensic link has likely turned to dust. The most immediately actionable evidence this crime scene had to offer would be gone, leaving investigators to chase shadows instead of a physical suspect. That specific tire, the one that bit into the granite and carried Nancy Guthrie away from her life, is still rotating on an asphalt road somewhere. It remains unidentified, unmatched, and entirely unknown, while the person behind the wheel continues to move through the world as if they are invisible. That is the staggering psychological weight Maureen O'Connell carried while analyzing that footage, knowing that for Nancy, the clock might have already run out. The public must understand exactly what was left on the table during those first hours, and what the mismanagement of the scene cost the victim. As the gravity of these errors becomes clearer, it becomes impossible for the authorities to let these haunting questions go unanswered any longer. Nancy Guthrie is still out there. Her family remains trapped in a state of perpetual waiting while the investigation stays officially open and unsolved. The driveway has held its secrets for too long, refusing to offer a public answer while the trail grows colder with every passing second. The national media abandoned this crime scene, leaving only those acutely aware of the tactical stakes to act as a final, lonely, vigilant perimeter. These sentinels refuse to let the case go cold. We must determine if the perpetrator's tire impressions were lifted with clinical, forensic precision. Was the driveway evidence cast, or did a delayed FBI response allow those physical prints to simply vanish? These questions matter. Nancy Guthrie's life demands a definitive answer.